Today's episode of the Nick Taylor Horror Show is brought to you by Diabolic DVD. For almost 20 years, Diabolic DVD has been the source for horror, cult, and weird cinema to customers around the world. Diabolic offers a one-stop shopping experience for all of your favorite labels, including Arrow, Synapse, Vinegar Syndrome, Severin, Mondo Macabro, Blue Underground, 88, and many more from all corners of the globe. So whether you're looking for the definitive version of Suspiria or trying to upgrade your crusty old DVD of Cannibal Holocaust, Diabolic is the owner-operated small business choice you've been craving. Shop online at diabolicdvd.com. That's DIABOLIK DVD.com. We're also brought to you by Deadly Grounds Coffee. It's the #1 choice of horror fans worldwide. Nothing starts your day or night better than a delicious cup of Deadly Grounds. Whether you're hunting ghosts or fighting the next zombie apocalypse, any one of Deadly's 30-plus roasts will bring you to caffeine nirvana with the richest flavor you've ever had. Whether you're craving their Hellhound Roast, Witch's Brew, Devil's Night Roast, or Sinful Delight, order online at getdeadly.com for easy and safe shipping right to your door. We know that once you go deadly, you won't go back. Join the deadly revolution today. Be bold, be different, be deadly. Deadly Grounds Coffee. Coffee to die for and zombie approved. Get some at getdeadly.com. Welcome to the Nick Taylor Horror Show. Eric Powell is a writer, artist, and creator of multiple award-winning graphic novels, including Hillbilly, Chimichanga, and my personal favorite comic of all time, The Goon. I've been looking forward to speaking to Eric for a long, long time. His work is sensational, and it mixes such a potent combination of horror, pulp fiction, film noir, and fart jokes into fun and poignant stories with compelling characters and exceptionally beautiful art. When you read through a book from The Goon or from Hillbilly, you will marvel in awe at how Eric is able to not only write all of that wonderful dialogue, but create all of this sophisticated and incredible art in every single issue. If you haven't read The Goon or haven't read Hillbilly, do yourself a favor and grab some of them on Amazon. I promise you will not be disappointed. Even if you don't consider yourself a graphic novel fan, just get some. Eric has been putting out The Goon for over 20 years and has been working on a film adaptation with David Fincher and Tim Miller for quite some time. You can see the very exciting proof of concept video on Kickstarter. When you observe the volume of Eric's creative output, it's pretty incredible and inspiring. I had to know how he did it, how he was able to get so much done and put so much work out. We get into this as well as comics, creative theory, writing processes, and so much more on this very fun episode of the Nick Taylor Horror Show. Now, please welcome Eric Powell. Well, hey man, I really, really appreciate this. Thank you so much for jumping on board. I've been a huge fan of yours for a really long time. I was in, it must have been, 10 years ago. I was in Meltdown Comics on Sunset, and I literally asked the guys, "Hey, do you know of any pulpy horror comics?" And they pointed me towards The Goon. First one I got was, somehow I went out of order, and the first one I got was the Chinatown issue, which is not issue, and I just devoured that, loved it, and then dove right back in. And that is like the one that's not funny. And then I was like, holy shit, this is also funny. And just, since then, just hook, line, and sinker with everything that you've done. So this is a tremendous honor. So thank you for jumping on the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
No, of course, man. You've been a really busy guy lately. I'm amazed at how much you are able to put out, in terms of in terms of overall content. You just strike me as such a relentless creative, between The Goon coming back and then Hillbillies going strong. You did a Superman comic. You have the other comics with under your Albatross label. I mean, there's a relentlessness to you that I just am totally fascinated by. So, I mean,
it's called survival. It's, when you're working in indie comics, you have to stay, you have to keep churning. You have to, keep material out there. So one, I just love doing it. I have a lot of ideas I want to get out there. But yeah, it's survival pretty much.
No, well, that makes sense. But yeah, I mean, with all of your material, there's just so many layers of storytelling and so many layers of themes and all of that. I'm always curious about how people capture ideas. I'm sure throughout the course of a given day, you have so many like little disparate ideas that's probably, culminate into like an issue of Goon or something else. So I'm wondering, what is your method for capturing ideas as you have them? Do you have like an Evernote folder, or like what's your way of keeping track of all the different ideas?
I have a reminder list on my phone of just random thoughts, random ideas that come to me, and usually stuff that actually finds it on the page, its way to the page, comes from two non-related ideas kind of combining. Where it's like, I've got an idea. It'd be fun to draw, this. And then some other idea I had intertwines with it. Or I find a connecting thread between the two things to make it, a little more interesting. And that's more often than not how an idea actually sees the light of day.
Interesting.
If that makes any sense at all.
Yeah, so it's like two different concepts that seemingly unrelated somehow. I
think that for the most part, like Buzzard is an example of that. If you know the character
very well,
Buzzard, that was intended to be its own series. Like it was just going to be a standalone character in a different universe, different book. And then I had the idea, well, what if I wove this guy into the zombie priest's history? Like he's a victim of the zombie priest and he's been hunting him. And that's where Buzzard worked his way into the Goon.
Oh, that's
so it's
cool.
kind of like two different ideas kind of linking up and becoming something a little bit bigger.
Interesting. Yeah, because I always thought that there was a tremendous amount of depth to the Buzzard character, and it felt like there was such backstory. You can kind of tell that you had thought through a whole series worth of backstory for that character.
Yeah.
Was that the character you were going, and if you don't want to answer this, I understand. Was that the character you were going to do the Goon spin-off series on?
I'm not sure what you're...
I think I read somewhere that you were working on a Goon spin-off series.
Oh, I'm doing it's actually out this October. It's called The Lords of Misery. It's not a series. It's a short graphic novella.
Oh, okay.
But it tells, if people are familiar with the series, that we had a gap between the Dark Horse series and then when I relaunched it at Albatross.
Right.
There's kind of a continuity gap there where the Goon left town and then he comes back in the Albatross series. So The Lords of Misery tells the story of what happened between those two events.
Oh, okay, cool.
And introduces some other characters and actually pulls a side character from the Goon and makes it a foreground character.
Oh, interesting. And that's coming out when?
October.
Oh, okay. Okay, cool. So, I mean, as both an artist and a writer, I mean, again, the just kind of relentless force of nature that you seem to be as a creator. Do you kind of abide by any sort of minimum when it comes to either art or writing? Is there any sort of like Stephen King 1,000, 2,000 words a day that you try to hit, or is it just on a project by project basis? I mean, how do you kind of keep the stokes of your writing fire alive?
Yeah, with writing is harder for me than the drawing. The drawing kind of comes naturally, especially, once I have everything laid out and I know where it's going.
Yeah.
I can just zone out and draw. But the writing takes so much more mental effort, and you're trying to solve a lot of problems. The writing actually slows me down. Because I'll go, okay, well, I'll give myself this much time to write a script or whatever, and it never happens in that amount of time.
Right.
It's always a lot of me staring at the wall and trying to figure out what's going on. So, I try to give myself, limits per day, where I want to get a page and a half done every day, but sometimes it goes faster and sometimes it goes slower. It's hard because you're dealing with something where it's not an assembly line. You're not manufacturing the same thing over and over every day. Every page is different.
Yeah.
Some pages are going to take more effort than others, and some you can just fly through. So it's hard to keep up that schedule, but you just kind of have to, go with it. And you kind of have to know when you're hitting a point where it's like, okay, I've just got to let it go.
Mm-hmm.
I've done as much as I can do to this in the time frame I have. So I just got to, wrap it up and let it go out the door, no matter if I'm disappointed in it or not.
Yeah, right. Yeah, the power of the deadline. I feel like it's so important for a lot of artists of all stripes. But I'm not surprised to hear that your writing takes a really long time, because there's such a nuance to, I mean, in the case of Goon and in Hillbilly, there's such a nuance to the dialogue and the way that they talk. And it's just such an amalgamation of so many different things. Like there's a kind of 1920s gangsterism, there's pulp elements to it, and then there's all these other influences, and it's complete, like Hillbilly is completely different in terms of the overall dialogue, tone, and the writing and all of it, but equally is deep in terms of having just all these different influences. So I'm curious, how do you kind of arrive at a writing voice for the different IPs that you work on, because they're so well done and so deep?
I don't know. I think I was always a pretty quiet kid. People they read my work and get a different perspective of me than the actual person. Mm-hmm. And I've had a lot of people come up to me at conventions and say, "Wow, you're not as crazy as I thought you would be." But I think, just being kind of an introverted, quiet kid when I was younger, you tend to listen more. Hmm. And you listen to the way people talk, you listen to, dialogue, whether it's people around you or movies or things like that. And I don't know, I guess my imagination works in a way where the characters become pretty, concrete in my head, it doesn't take, if you ask me a question, say, how would the Goon respond to this question? It's like, oh, he would say this.
It's just,
it's just there, it's just like, I know how he would respond to something, without even really thinking that much about it. But, I do take a lot of, pain with the dialogue though, to get that kind of like snappy, kind of a friends arguing kind of, back and forth with it.
Yeah.
Hillbilly is pretty easy because I grew up in the South. Mm-hmm. It's like I just make an extreme version of everything I grew up with, as far as dialogue goes.
Keeping it authentic.
So, I mean, I've grown up with that slang my entire life, so it's not hard to write the Hillbilly dialogue. And Hillbilly is a lot of fun too, just because I set out to do just a straight out fantasy book. So, taking a 17 or 1800s Appalachian setting and just mixing some fantasy into it. It's been a lot of fun, kind of mixing those genres.
Yeah, I feel like the Goon is similar in how just mixing genres, you come up with something completely new and completely different. It's like an alchemical process almost.
Yeah, it's kind of the same thought process went into the Goon as Hillbilly, where I took kind of horror and noir and mixed them together in a kind of a weird way, and then kind of did the same thing with Hillbilly, mixing fantasy and Appalachian folklore. But two different ends of the spectrum, but kind of the same thought process.
Right. Yeah, and I feel like when you mix things that are that different, it just there's something very powerful about it and something very unique about about being able to do that for sure.
I think it makes it a little bit more fun in a world building kind of way, because it's not just, anybody can go, I'm going to do a Tolkien fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, it's been done a million times and there are authors out there that do it really well, but it's not, it's just the same world, that you're entering into over and over again. Whereas, with Hillbilly, those genres create an extra layer to it, an extra interesting aspect that, I tend to like stories like that mix environments and create something a little new.
Yeah. Well, on the topic of world building, I mean, I'm really curious about how a lot of creators, particularly comic creators, are able to create worlds with as much depth and, compelling elements. I mean, in the case of, obviously, I keep going back to Goon and Hillbilly, but those worlds are, you can feel them. They're so different, but you can just tell that they've all been completely and totally thought out. So how do you approach world building? I mean, do you start with any sort of a story Bible, about the time period, or, the rules and the laws of that world? Or is it something that you just kind of intuitively know and feel? I mean, what is your approach to building those worlds?
Yeah, like the dialogue, I tend to work basically off of instinct, where it's like, I feel like this is right. As far as like any kind of story Bible or anything like that, I tend to only really focus on that stuff is if it has something to do with the plot.
Okay.
So if it's something story related, then it's like I'll build out a little bit of the history. But I tend to just go, okay, this is my world, and then I'll just run with it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it feels refreshing that it seems like you don't have the agenda to kind of explain certain elements of the world. And I think that even makes it stronger. Yeah.
Yeah. In the Goon, I don't explain anything.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like, I let the story that I want to tell be what it's going to be.
Right.
Whether it's really over the top and goofy, or it's kind of like sad and tragic, like Chinatown. And I intended the book to be that way. I wanted to do something where I could get away with absolutely anything I wanted to do. And, that is what the Goon has been for me. I've been able to really, play around and experiment quite a bit. But yeah, it's definitely been a fun playground.
Yeah. Well, I mean, now that you brought some new writers into the fold when it comes to the Goon, were there any kind of did you have to? It sounds like you were working with people, obviously, who clearly really just understood the world and understood the Goon, but were there any sort of things you had to explain to them about the world and the characters just to make sure that they were, operating from the same place as you were? Or did it all just naturally, organically work?
Yeah, I mean, the guys I've let write the Goon so far have not needed a whole lot of hand holding. I would definitely do a lot of editing. Mostly dialogue stuff.
Okay.
Because like I said, I know how the characters react to something. I've been doing them for 20 years. So it's kind of, I definitely have a set, standard in my mind of what they should or should not say.
Yeah.
So I would edit the dialogue a bit, but I haven't had to do it too much. Just some places here or there, and with Roger Landridge, he's British, so there were a few instances where I think he was using some slang that I was like, well, that's not really. It's not really doesn't really fit the characters here. It's more of a British thing, but we would find an equivalent.
Yeah. Was it difficult to kind of hand over your baby to your 20-year-old baby to other writers, or it seems like it felt like a natural thing for you?
No, because I was so overworked. I was like, I needed help. I was so ready for someone else to come in because I was juggling so much stuff.
Okay.
But Yeah, I think everyone did a really good job, and I'm pretty happy with the results.
Oh, that's great. So, I mean, as far as your kind of origin story, as it were, it's I mean, I love the idea of you starting your own label because a lot of publishers were rejecting the Goon, and you wanted to, and they were saying it was too weird or too out there, so you just basically started your own comic label. I feel like
Yeah.
that's so huge and inspirational, and I think without that sort of willingness and that sort of initiative, there's so many unique voices that just would not come to light. So, I mean, for people not as familiar with that story, I mean, do you mind just kind of humming a few bars as to how you were able to
Sure.
get the Goon off the ground? Because I feel like it's really important for a lot of creators.
Yeah. So around the late 90s, I had been working in comics. I was doing a few fill-in jobs here and there. Um, I'd been doing some inking,
Hmm.
but I didn't feel like I was being given material that really showed off what I was capable of. And you got to remember, in the 90s, there was definitely a popular style. There was
Right.
that, kind of like 90s West Coast thing going on with all the cross hatching and everything. And I was not that. I was like a throwback. I was trying to draw like Bernie Wrightson and, Richard Corbin and guys like that.
Yeah.
So my style wasn't very mainstream, and I don't think my sensibilities were very mainstream. So any stuff I was trying to do myself, it just kind of got rejected and thrown aside because it didn't fit what people thought was popular, you know. Uh, so then my inking work started drying up, my fill-in work started drying up, and I went to a convention, the old Chicago Comic Con that was at the Rosemont, and I think I did one sketch the entire weekend,
Whoa.
and no one cared. No, I had a table in Artist Alley, and I could not have been more felt more unwanted there.
Oh
I just
man.
did. No one cared that I was there. I remember, like, it got to a point where I was just twiddling my thumbs and was like, well, I'll just do some sketches and set them out on the table. Maybe someone will want to buy them. I remember doing, I think uh, it sticks pretty vividly in my mind. I think I did like a Dr. Doom and a Silver Surfer or something and sat them out on my table and wrote little, like, $25 or something,
Hmm.
whatever it was, on the corner. Came home with them.
Oh
No one
man.
even no one even cared. And so it's about an 8-hour drive from Chicago to Nashville, and I made that drive back home from that convention alone.
Oh hell.
So I was like, well, I'm not getting any more work. No one cares. No one likes my work. And so I guess this is the end. And I started thinking about, like, what am I going to do? What kind of a job am I going to get now? Because all I've ever thought about doing was comics,
Hmm.
and it just seemed like it wasn't going to work. And then on that long drive home, I made the decision. It's like, you know what? I still feel like I've not been able to show what I'm capable of. I don't feel like I'm being given a chance. So you know what? I'm going to give it one more shot. I'm going to self-publish, and put the Goon out there, and see if I can, at least when I go out, it'll be on my terms.
Yeah.
I'll put out something that I can at least be proud of.
So you'd been sitting on the idea for the Goon for a while at this point.
Yeah, I've been trying to get people to publish it.
Oh, okay.
And just no one, like you said, no one was into it. It just wasn't. It wasn't. He wasn't a character with big shoulder pads and spikes and a big gun and tiny feet.
Right.
So yeah, I ended up getting a loan and self-publishing, and then there was like an immediate internet response. People started talking about it online. People started reviewing it, and
Wow.
then I had only gotten a couple issues out before Dark Horse contacted me about picking it up.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah, it's and it's one of those, you got to pay your dues. kind of stories. You gotta keep fighting.
Yeah.
No one's gonna, no one's gonna just drop it into your lap. You got to work for it.
Yeah. And then 20 years later, here you are.
Yeah.
With a prolific amount
Still
of Goon comics. Still working for it. But looking at a movie deal, I can edit this out, but are you sick and tired of talking about the movie at this point, or can we get into it a little?
It is what it is. I accept it. The only thing that bothers me is when people online will go, "Hey, what's up with the movie?"
Right.
And it's like, you got to know, even if I could tell you something, which I can't, I'm not going to talk to a random person on the internet about this.
Right.
And it's like, what do you expect me to say? I can't answer your question.
Right.
So that happens a lot. And it's like, I'll post something like, please donate some money to this kid with cancer. And in the comments, hey, what's up with the movie? It's like, man, have some social awareness or something,
Yeah. This internet hawks. Yeah, they're relentless. But I feel like now there's such an interest in like adult focused animation,
Right.
which is really exciting. So yeah, it feels like it was a perfect time. Well, I'm curious about. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I feel we're still moving forward with the movie. And I feel like we're in a really good place right now, probably better than we ever have been.
That's great.
I'm pretty hopeful that, pretty optimistic that it's actually going to happen. I don't know when, but
yeah, once I read that Tim Miller was involved, I got really excited. Thought, okay, it's in good hands.
Yeah, Tim and Jeff Fowler and David Fincher have been there from the beginning, and they're still super gung ho about it. So those guys have just been amazing.
That's great.
I wouldn't still be trying to get it made with them after, over 10 years, I think at this point, if it wasn't for the fact that those guys, I feel like they really understand it and get what it needs to be to work.
Yeah.
So I feel like I fell into a really good situation. I just really wanted to, get across the finish line.
Yeah. No, it sounds like it's just a labor of love on your end and on their end, because I think that they see that it would just be a blissful movie, just 90-minute and then subsequent sequels. And it would be incredible.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah. Well, that's great. Yeah. I'm curious, were there any other incarnations of what the movie could be before you arrived at that kind of hyper real animated style? Did you ever consider like a Sin City style live action or a series or straight cartoon?
In the very beginning, I thought the Goon would make a great stop motion animated movie. But that's, there's so few of those, and it's takes so long to produce that it's not really anything that I pursued.
Yeah.
Because I thought, it'd be damn near impossible to get that, made. But of course there were a lot of people sniffing around with interest for a live action movie, but I didn't think it was I didn't think there was anyone there that could actually get it made. So when I personally had some doubts about doing an animated movie, because I did think that it would be hard to get it made, because there wasn't, especially at that time, there wasn't a lot of adult animation going on.
Right.
But I was like, at that point in time, Tim and Jeff hadn't done anything in any films. So this was way before Deadpool and Sonic and all that stuff. So,
right.
But I knew who David Fincher was, and I was like really excited about that idea of working with him.
Yeah.
But I was still really iffy about it. And then Blur sent me their demo reel, and it was amazing. And I instantly, after watching it, I got super excited and was like, yeah, I want to talk to these guys about making an animated movie. And the Goon it could work as a live action movie, but I feel like in my heart it really needs to be animated.
Yeah. Now, I tried imagining what Frankie would look like if it was live action. Like, would his eyes still be white?
You would just cast a guy. You would just cast a guy.
Yeah.
You know?
And it would lose the kind of soul of your drawings. And I don't know. I feel like so much would get lost in translation. Like, I feel like you need to have that complete and total creative control and artistic control that only animation would be able to give you.
Yeah. Something would definitely get lost. You'd have to make up for it in the dialogue, you know, and just really make the character over the top. But I think in order to really get the vibe of the books, it would have to be animated.
Yeah. And the style of animation that Blur did, the Kickstarter sample animation, right? Yeah. They just seem to completely nail it. You know, that overall style, and it has realistic textures, but it still has that you can tell that it's your style and it's your art.
It's like they just took my drawings and made it, you know, 3D.
Yeah. What did it feel like when you first saw that?
I tell you, it was amazing, but the time I really geeked out and almost started crying was I went to we did a little recording session with Clancy Brown and Paul Giamatti for the test footage, and so they let me come out for it, and the first time I heard Paul Giamatti scream "knife to the eye," I was like, holy shit, I can't believe I'm listening to this. I can't believe I'm sitting in a room with all these guys and these actors, and I'm hearing him say, you know, the catchphrase of my character. So it was a bizarre experience.
That's so cool. That's really cool. Yeah, man. Me along with many others cannot wait. It'll be worth the wait, though. You know, no doubt about that.
Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed, man. Yeah. So you recently wrote somewhat of an autobiography. I'm curious, in the process of doing that, were there any major creative lessons that presented themselves that kind of you were able to discover looking at your life retrospectively?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure about lessons.
Or insights of any kind.
Yeah, no, I set out to write I wanted to do this bizarre kind of art book that was also a humorous biography.
Yeah.
So I took actual like events from my life, but I'm assuming that you've read it since you're asking about it. But it's written from the point of view of a crime writer or a psychologist, and he's just calling me the biggest pile of garbage throughout the entire book. So I felt it was fun, and it takes some of the ego out of, you know, writing a biography on yourself, you know, autobiography. So it was like I was able to talk about some of these things, but also not sound like a self-absorbed, you know, jerk.
Right.
I just made myself sound like a regular jerk.
Now, I love how you just see Goon's face the minute you open it, and he's like, "You actually spent money on this? Like, what is wrong with you?" Yeah, that's awesome.
I think that self-deprecating humor is like a defense mechanism from growing up, because it's like if you put yourself down, you know, you take the chance for anybody else to do it for you.
Yeah, I learned that as a kid too. I was very just introverted, geeky kid, you know, loved my horror movies, and that was about it. But definitely learned if you make fun of yourself, you deter bullies or, you know, other.
But it's just like nothing that you say is going to affect me because I've already put myself down worse than you can.
Yeah.
You know, kind of thing. And, you know, I grew up in rural Tennessee, so it was like, you know, and I loved science fiction and horror. So I was real weird in a comparison to the rest of the kids around.
Yeah.
So
yeah, man, me too. I was the only one I knew who loved horror movies and horror comics and stuff like that as a kid. You know, it's those weird kids who don't have like a tribe that kind of have to. I don't know. I feel like it forces you in a way to be more creative and to actually do something with those inclinations that you have, because all the other kids are into sports and they love sports, but they don't go pro. None of those kids go pro. It's the weird kids who are into stuff that nobody else is into that kind of have something to prove and need to take that passion somewhere. So I don't know. I look back fondly at childhood.
Yeah. I was able to find my group, I found a bunch of metalhead kids and fit right in. So that was my group. But, when I was young, it was like everybody, Dukes of Hazzard was really big at the time. Everybody wanted to play Dukes of Hazzard, and I was like, anybody want to play Star Wars? So
nobody wanted to play Star Wars. Man, that's crazy.
No, they were all Bo and Luke Duke. That was my environment.
Nice. Well, what were some of your most formidable influences as a child that still to this day echo in your work?
I think the Rankin Bass cartoons, the stuff like The Hobbit and some of their more fantasy-driven stuff, I think artistically those were a big influence on me because I remember drawing these monsters over and over again, and they kind of look like the goblins from The Hobbit in the Rankin Bass cartoon. And I think that really... And if you look at some of my monsters today with the bug eyes and everything, they definitely have that kind of Rankin Bass fantasy cartoon look to them.
Yeah.
But I was definitely it was all about movies when I was a kid. It was I loved the old episodes of Twilight Zone, and then there was always some kind of sci-fi or horror movie coming on Sunday afternoons, and I watched all that stuff religiously.
Yeah.
As before cable and everything, we just got, local channels. So it was, Saturday night movies or Sunday afternoon movies. Mm-hmm. A lot of Godzilla.
Nice.
A lot of stuff like that.
Steady diet of horror and sci-fi.
Yeah.
Did like noir and pulp come into the picture at a young age, or was that something you got into later?
That's more of a thing where I started getting into it when, I started out, more monster movie kind of thing. And then as I got older, I started getting late teens into my 20s, you start to appreciate, maybe your spectrum gets a little wider, you know, and you start to appreciate more artistic things. And I started getting into noir and crime movies and, of course, the Godfather films and Martin Scorsese and stuff like that. And started really getting a love for that genre. And I had always had kind of an affinity for the 1930s and 40s, that kind of snappy dialogue and
like His Girl Friday,
just the vibe of it, just the visual vibe of it. Everybody in a suit, and even the bums looked cool. Yeah, even like a hobo had a hat and a jacket on. It's like it was just a different
people
time.
Gave a damn.
Yeah, even a hobo wears a suit and a hat. But yeah, that kind of came along later. And then, obviously those two worlds collided into the Goon.
Very cool. It's funny how all this stuff just eventually finds its way into your work.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Eric, I can't thank you enough, man. This was super duper cool. And really, really appreciate it. So thank you. What are you working on next?
I'm sorry?
What are you working on next?
We're doing another Hillbilly series.
Great.
That will be, I forget when it's out. I think it's November.
Has you're probably not allowed to talk about this. Any talks of anything Hillbilly animated or?
I probably wouldn't go. I mean, I wouldn't say never, but I probably wouldn't go animated with Hillbilly. I think that would actually lend itself a little bit better to having a live action thing.
Oh, that would be interesting.
But no deals are signed yet.
Yeah.
So.
Great. Well, I'll be anxiously awaiting it.
Thank you. Thanks.
Awesome.
Okay. Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Of course, man. Huge admirer of your work. So yeah, it was definitely great to finally talk to you.
Yeah. Good talking to you too.
Cool. Thanks, Eric. Take care, man. Be safe.
Thank you.
All right. Big thanks as always for listening, and another big thank you to Eric for being on the show today. Really, really enjoyed talking to him, as I've been a fan for a really, really long time. If you enjoyed this episode, why not share it with your friends and family on social media? Don't forget to follow the show on Instagram at I'm Nick Taylor, that's I am Nick Taylor, and on Twitter at the same handle. Thanks again for listening to the Nick Taylor Horror Show.